Meditation 2. I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Frustrated grace, the reason why so many Christians struggle. There is a powerful statement of victory in Paul's letter to the Romans. For if by one man's offense death reigned by one, much more they which receive abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness shall reign in life by one, Jesus Christ. It is a simple statement that believers in Jesus Christ should reign in life. The reality of this truth is indicated in the statement of Jesus. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. Regardless of the conditions, the Christian should be on top of the circumstances. Life does not rule the believer reigns in life. Paul knew the reality of reigning in life regardless of the circumstances, for he wrote to the Corinthians, We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed. For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might redound to the glory of God. The believer should reign in life. However, the reality of far too many Christians is not one of victory, but rather of frustration, failure, and defeat. The Christian often finds himself reacting to life much like the non-believer. When circumstances are good, the emotional feelings are good. When circumstances get tough, the believer often finds himself experiencing emotional lows. The emotional status of many Christians rise and falls with the circumstances they are facing. Life is dictating to the believer, rather than the believer reigning in life. Why do so many believers experience failure and defeat when the promise of victory is so prevalent? The answer to that question lies in the often overlooked phrases of abundance of grace and abundant grace. Again, Paul gives insight to this victorious living. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. I do not frustrate the grace of God. Paul did not frustrate grace, and that abundance of grace allowed him to reign in life. This issue of not frustrating the grace of God was such an important issue in the early church that the entire letter of Galatians was written to warn of its consequences. Paul wrote, Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. Again, the same emphasis is given when Paul stated, I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Understanding the phrases works of the law, and if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain, is to understand the very essence of why so many Christians struggle. It is also the understanding of that which frustrates grace. In beginning to develop this understanding, Paul asked a rather penetrating question to the Galatians. He, in essence, stated, "I just want to know one thing. How did you get saved? This only would I learn of you. Receive ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith?" Paul is indeed asking the saints, how did you become a Christian? How did the Spirit of Christ come into your life in the salvation experience? Was it by works, or self-righteousness, or was it through faith in hearing the gospel message? The response to that question was apparently rather easy to answer, for Paul stated, "I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ." The essence of Paul's message to the Galatians was no doubt the same gospel he wrote about to the Ephesians. "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." Paul stated to the Galatians, "You did not get saved by works, you were saved by grace through faith." He is assuming that they will know this basic truth of how they became Christians. They were saved by grace through faith. It is the next statement of Paul to the Galatians that is the key to understanding frustrated grace. He wrote, "Are ye so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh?" The word perfect is the standard word used in the New Testament for Christian maturity. It literally means arriving at the end to which you were intended, or being made complete. It simply means becoming all you can become in Jesus Christ. One who is perfect is a mature Christian, with the emphasis being on the process of, "Are ye being perfected?" rather than the actual arrival at perfection. Paul asked the Galatian saints, how does a believer go about the business of becoming a perfected saint? He is probing for an understanding of the very heart of what it means to be a Christian. He is asking, how did you get saved? How do you stay saved? Paul is laying the foundation for an understanding of continual, victorious Christian living. A believer not only is saved by grace, he is also perfected by grace. Paul raised the question, in essence, does a Christian develop into spiritual maturity by the flesh? The word flesh, especially in Paul's letter to the Galatians, is probably one of the most misunderstood words in the New Testament. Many attempts are made to define the term. Flesh is understood by some to mean carnality, with carnality being understood roughly as lower, debased ethical nature. To many casual readers of the New Testament, flesh carries the connotation of dirty, rotten desires. For the sake of illustration, let us interpret flesh as dirty, rotten desires. It does not take too much sense to know that a Christian is not perfected by dirty, rotten desires. Flesh here and in the entire letter of Galatians must have a different meaning. Paul gave a vital clue to the meaning of flesh in chapter 4, verse 22 and 23. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. Does flesh here mean dirty, rotten desires? I think not. Abraham did not go into Hagar because he could not control his biological glands. Dirty, rotten desires were not the motivation for a son being born of the bondwoman. The Old Testament account of the son of the bondwoman being born reveals that God had promised a child to Abraham and to Sarah in their old age. The son, however, did not come immediately after the promise. So, what did Abraham and Sarah do? They decided to help God out in his promise to give them a child. The error was not necessarily Abraham going into Hagar, but Abraham and Sarah attempting to help God out in the fulfilling of the promise. Just look at the pain, agony, death, and dying the perceived to be noble act of helping God out has caused in the world. When the Christian tries to help God out and attempts to live for God in his own ability, grace is frustrated, meaning God cannot do as he wants to do in and through the believer's mind. There is only one way to experience all the blessings of God which allows the believer to reign in life. Paul gives it in Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, humanness, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Paul is stating simply that he does not attempt to live for Christ, frustrating grace. Christ lives in him. It is not based upon the faith of Paul, but by the faith of the Son of God. This is what it means to be Christian. This is the good news of the gospel. Christ died on the cross and was resurrected for the forgiveness of sin. Christ lives within and through the believer for the sin-free life of holiness. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the good news for mankind. The free flow of grace as opposed to frustrated grace is how the abundant life is experienced. Thought and prayer for today. Heavenly Father, I want to live in the fullness of your grace. Forgive me for all the times I have tried to live my life in my own ability. Bring me face to face with your Son that I might be changed and experience what it means to have him living in and through me. May your grace be the essence of my life.